When you think of the Titans of the old NFL who have been around from the league's formation, you probably think of the Chicago Bears or Green Bay Packers, but there is one team you probably aren't thinking of. In today's episode, we take a look at the oldest, continuously run professional football team in the United States, the Arizona Cardinals. Sit back and get comfortable, because this one's going to be a long one. Our football journey takes us all the way back to the year 1898. You heard that right, 1898. The same year as the Spanish-American War, the team that would eventually become the modern Arizona Cardinals began playing football. That team was the Morgan Athletic Club, which was organized by a Chicago painter and contractor named Chris O'Brien, who both technically owned the team and also played on it. His amateur football team played in Chicago's Normal Park and were sometimes called the Racine Normals. The park was located on Racine Avenue in Chicago, hence the name. In 1901, O'Brien bought used jerseys from the nearby University of Chicago, in which their maroon color had faded. O'Brien famously claimed that, quote, "That's not maroon, it's cardinal red," and thus renamed the team the Racine Street Cardinals. Due to football still being very amateur in the early 1900s, games were few and far between. In fact, in 1906, the team had to disband from a lack of competition, and it wasn't until 1913 that the team was able to reform back together. The team began to perform quite well in a thriving Chicago football circuit that featured the Decatur Staleys, Hammond Pros, and Chicago Tigers, to go along with our Racine Cardinals. However, in 1918, the team was forced to disband once again, due to World War I and the Spanish flu pandemic. However, 1 year later, the team was able to reorganize and have been in continuous operation ever since. In 1920, the Racine Street Cardinals joined the recently formed American Professional Football Association as a charter member. The American Professional Football Association would later be renamed the National Football League, or the NFL. The only other current NFL team to have existed before officially joining the NFL was the previously mentioned Decatur Staleys. That team would later be renamed the Chicago Bears. So what would become two of the longest lasting teams in the NFL both came from that strong Chicago football circuit. And those two teams would actually play each other twice in the league's very first year, splitting the series 1-1, making it technically the NFL's oldest rivalry. I also have to tell you about the very first clash between these teams. The Racine Street Cardinals won the game 7-6 after both teams scored touchdowns off of fumble recoveries. Yet, the difference being the Cardinals completed their extra point attempt and the Chicago Staleys missed their extra point attempt, giving the Cardinals the first win in the Chicago rivalry. In the very first league meeting between NFL owners, whoever was keeping minutes of the meeting listed the Racine Cardinals as being from Racine, Wisconsin, not knowing they were named after Racine Avenue in Chicago. That wasn't too big of a deal, just some incorrect notes in a meeting. Well, that was until 1922, when things got awkward when an actual team from Racine, Wisconsin, the Hoylake Racine Legion, joined the NFL. So, in 1922, the team was renamed the Chicago Cardinals. That should hopefully cut out on any confusion, or at least I would hope. Anyway, the Chicago Cardinals were a mixed bag of results in the league's first few years. In fact, in the league's first 6 years, the two Chicago teams, the Cardinals and the Bears, would have direct impact on the league championship 4 times, both of them taking home one title during that time span. However, in general, the Bears were the stronger and better football team. So much so that no team other than the Canton Bulldogs, who had won the NFL championship themselves back-to-back in 1922 and 1923, were able to beat the Bears more than one time in a 6-year span. Except for those pesky rivals, the Chicago Cardinals, who went 4-4-2 during that same time span. The Chicago Cardinals also could have taken home another NFL championship in 1925. Or maybe they did? It's complicated. It was the NFL's first, and maybe in terms of results, the biggest controversy in NFL history. To set it up, in 1925, the champion of the league was dictated by whichever team had the best winning percentage when the league year was over. However, there was also no fixed schedule or any playoff games. It was open-ended, meaning teams could schedule their own games, which leads us to the controversy. The Cardinals were sitting half a game ahead of the Pottsville Maroons for first place in the league. However, near the season's end, the Cardinals lost in a snowstorm game to the Maroons and found themselves in second place in the league standings. Coincidentally, the Cardinals quickly and simply just scheduled 2 more games for themselves against 2 very easy teams, the Milwaukee Badgers and Hammond Pros. As it would turn out, the Milwaukee Badgers didn't have enough players to play their game, and they hired local high school players to play for them. The league was obviously not fond of this, and they sanctioned that victory heavily as punishment, even forcing the Badgers owner to sell the team. The NFL also said it would take a look into removing the win from the Cardinals, but the NFL never got around to it. Maybe they never got around to it because of what was going on with the Pottsville Maroons. The championship of the league should now go to the Pottsville Maroons, since they would technically have the best winning percentage over the Cardinals. Well, as it would turn out, the Maroons had played in an unauthorized exhibition game in Philadelphia against the University of Notre Dame All-Stars, which violated the territorial rights of the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. As a result, the NFL suspended the Maroons and removed them from the league for that year as punishment. So, by default, at the end of all of that, the championship would go to the second place team, the Cardinals. However, just to throw one more wrench into this situation, owner Chris O'Brien declined the championship, saying that the Maroons had deserved it for rightfully beating his team in that snowy showdown originally. What an honorable guy. So as a result, the league technically had no winner of the 1925 championship. That was until 1933, when new Cardinals owner Charles Bidwill finally claimed the 1925 championship as belonging to the Cardinals. In the 20 years following the championship, the Cardinals would only have a winning record twice. Yep, 2 winning records in 20 years. Those winning records coming in 1931 and 1935. So this included a decade of losing football between 1936 and 1945. All of this losing, as well as the growing popularity of the Chicago Bears, played a hand in Chris O'Brien selling the team that he originally created back in 1898 to a local physician named David Jones in 1929. But the one notable thing to happen under Jones was convincing future Hall of Famer Ernie Nevers out of retirement to play and coach the Cardinals. But despite this, the losses continued to stack up. One night in 1932, while at an informal dinner with Vice President of the Chicago Bears, David Jones supposedly joked that he would sell anything that he owned if the price was right. The Vice President of the Chicago Bears, that was none other than Charles Bidwill, who turned to Jones and started making offers. And 1 year later, after selling off his stock in the Chicago Bears, Bidwill officially bought the Chicago Cardinals from David Jones. And the Cardinals have been in the Bidwill family ever since. It is also definitely worth mentioning before we move on that during this time in the NFL, there were very few African American players in the league. However, the Cardinals were one of the few who did employ one. Duke Slater played offensive line for the Cardinals and was impressively good. Racist opinions were strong in that time period, and the NFL began to follow the practices of other professional leagues by instituting a pseudo-color ban. By 1929, Duke Slater was the only African American player employed in the NFL. In that season, Slater was a featured offensive lineman on a day in which Ernie Nevers ran in 6 rushing touchdowns in a 40-6 victory. But Slater's impact was greater than just his stellar blocking. He actually played all 60 minutes of that game, contributing on the defensive line and on special teams as well. Slater eventually retired in 1931. He earned All-Pro honors 6 times. But otherwise, the Chicago Cardinals continued to uneventfully hum along with below-adequate football. However, in 1944, something interesting happened. Just not in terms of wins and losses. The team was short on players due to World War II, so the Cardinals and Pittsburgh Steelers merged together for one season into a team called Card Pit, real original. And they did not win a single game that year. This gave them the nickname the Carpets, as in every team walked all over them. Art Rooney, the founder of the Pittsburgh Steelers, referred to it as the worst team in NFL history. To put that into context, the Card Pit team completed only 31% of their passes and only had 8 touchdowns compared with 41 interceptions. That's the third highest amount of interceptions in a single season ever. And remind you, they only played in 10 games that year. Even their punting was bad. They only averaged an abysmal 32.7 yards per punt, which ranks as the worst in NFL history. The Card Pit football team was just very bad. Moving on from that one season, the Chicago Cardinals were back in business. The business of losing, that is. But the 1945 season was technically an improvement over the winless 1944 season. They broke their NFL record 29-game losing streak with a 16-7 win over their old pals, the Chicago Bears. Of course, that would end up being their only win in that season. A couple of years later, the 1947 season brought many changes for the Cardinals. The NFL had finally standardized a 12-game season, and the Cardinals surprisingly went 9-3 that year, and beat Philadelphia in the championship game for the first time since that famous 1925 championship. This championship run was all due to the Cardinals breaking open the piggy bank and paying top dollar for some of the best players, including Paul Christman, Pat Harder, Marshall Goldberg, and the All-American Charlie Trippi, who they paid an unprecedented for that time $100,000 contract. This group of players would become known as the $1 Million Backfield. And all that money was seemingly worth it, and the team finally won games and they won that championship that year. Unfortunately, the man who signed all of those checks before the season never got to see them all play together. Owner Charles Bidwill died of pneumonia before the season began, and his wife Violet took over the team. So in her first year, the team won the championship. In the following year, the team finished 11-1 and returned to the championship, only to lose in a rematch to the Eagles in a heavy snowstorm, in what was the first NFL championship to ever be televised. So expectations were still high, coming off these 2 straight championship appearances in 47 and 48. Entering 1949, Violet married a St. Louis, Missouri-based businessman named Walter Wolfner. That year, the Cardinals fell to 6-5-1, and in the following decade, the Cardinals only had one winning season, in 1957, in which they went 7-5. Otherwise, the 1950s were a time of losing and of falling further from their previous championship and further into the shadows of their more successful brother, the Chicago Bears. The pot was stirring and cooking up the perfect recipe for relocation. With the team nearing bankruptcy, the Bidwills requested to move the team out of the shadows of Chicago, but the NFL demanded a sizable relocation fee that the Bidwills refused to pay. Running low on money, the Bidwills offered to sell stake in the team to out-of-town bidders. However, those negotiations did not go very far, as the Bidwills were unwilling to give up their majority control. Those investors happened to be none other than Lamar Hunt, Bud Adams, Bob Howsam, and Max Winter, who would all go on to join forces and create the American Football League. This, in turn, created pressure on the NFL, as they suddenly had what looked like an actual competent rival league to their own. As a result, in 1960, the NFL caved in and came to a relocation deal with Bidwill, and the team moved to St. Louis, which gave the Cardinals a fresh start and also blocked a potential market for the new AFL. The St. Louis Cardinals, also referred to as the Football Cardinals, as they shared a name with the already established Major League Baseball team of the same name. The fans were not quick to latch onto their new professional football team, and revenue still wasn't great. And unfortunately, in 1962, owner Violet Bidwill passed away, and her son, Bill Bidwill, would take over the team. And as the 1960s rolled on, the team began to become a little more competitive. In 1970, the NFL merged with the AFL, and the Cardinals replaced the newly created NFC East division. And in 1974, the Cardinals finished 10-4, winning the division and making the playoffs for the first time in 26 years. However, they did lose their one playoff game to the Minnesota Vikings 30-14. But undeterred, the Cardinals followed that up with a second straight division win in 1975. However, the same results followed, as they would lose their one playoff game to the Los Angeles Rams 35-23. However, after that, the team quickly regressed back to mediocrity, with their only other playoff appearance during their time in St. Louis coming in a strike-shortened 1982 season, in which the Cardinals finished 5-4 and made the playoffs, but lost in the wildcard round. Their nearly 3 decades in St. Louis can be summed up as below average, with a few flashes in the middle that ultimately amounted to nothing. And unsurprisingly, the fan base was growing tired of losing. Combine that with an aging stadium and ticket sales began to drop. Owner Bill Bidwill was once again in the market to relocate his team. The people of St. Louis, despite poor attendance at games, were still frustrated that Bidwill was bailing on them and moving out. In fact, Bidwill would actually stop showing up to home games in fear for his own safety. Ultimately though, on March 18, 1988, the NFL granted permission to Bidwill to move the Cardinals to Tempe, Arizona. The team was renamed the Phoenix Cardinals and began their inaugural season with a bang, sitting at 7-4 and atop of the NFC East. However, this seemingly cursed franchise would lose their next 5 straight games and miss the playoffs entirely. The next 4 seasons after that saw the team finish 5-11 or 4-12. The era of the Phoenix Cardinals was not much different from any other era we've talked about. Lots of losing, and resulting in the fans being hesitant to hop on the bandwagon of their new team. So, in March 1994, owner Bill Bidwill decided to appease the new fans, and he changed the name of the team to the much preferred Arizona Cardinals. It just rolls off the tongue so much better. Anyways, that year the team also hired coach Buddy Ryan, who was also given general manager powers over the team. At the time of his hiring, he proclaimed, quote, "You've got a winner in town," and with brimming confidence, he even guaranteed a Week 3 victory against the Cleveland Browns. The Browns would win that game 32-0. Overall, the Cardinals would finish 8-8 that season, which, I mean, given the recent history, wasn't all that bad, but Ryan followed that up in 1995 with a 4-12 season, and was let go. Under new head coach Vince Tobin, things didn't get much better, besides for a surprise playoff appearance in 1998. But you know what's even more shocking than their playoff appearance? They actually won that playoff game, beating the Cowboys 20-7. Unfortunately for them, that victory ran them straight into a buzzsaw in the divisional round against the 15-1 Minnesota Vikings. But after getting crushed in the divisional round, it didn't matter because they had finally done it. They had gotten a playoff win for the first time in 51 years. So, they built off that momentum and began to compete for a title, right? No, of course not. The Cardinals would go 6-10 the very next season and then bottom out in the year 2000 with a 3-13 season, which ultimately got Tobin fired. The next 2 head coaches, Dave McGinnis and Dennis Green, never had a winning season, although during that stretch they did get a fancy new state-of-the-art stadium, but that didn't help them win any football games. It wasn't until 2007, when Ken Wisenhunt took over as head coach, that the team turned things around, and in quite a hurry. In his first year with the team, Wisenhunt went 8-8, and in 2008, the team went 9-7 and won the NFC West division. The team was manned by future Hall of Fame quarterback Kurt Warner and wide receiver Larry Fitzgerald, who will also end up in Canton one day. And their greatness began to make magic. They won the wildcard game against the Falcons, and then they won a divisional round against the Panthers, and then they won a conference championship against the Eagles, and oh my, the Arizona Cardinals are in a championship game for the first time since 1948, and their first Super Bowl appearance in franchise history. They had a date with the 12-4 Pittsburgh Steelers. The team that they had once combined with to form the worst season of all time was now their opponent in the biggest game. And the game was one for the ages. The Steelers entered halftime with a lead, aided by a Super Bowl record 100-yard pick six by linebacker James Harrison. And the Cardinals would find themselves trailing 20-7 entering the final quarter. That is, before they scored 16 unanswered points that included a Steelers safety as well as a 64-yard touchdown catch from Larry Fitzgerald. The Cardinals were leading in the final seconds of the Super Bowl. Unfortunately for the Cardinals, a man named Santonio Holmes exists. He caught 4 passes for 73 yards to march the team down the field and then scored an acrobatic, unreal catch in the corner of the end zone to win the game with only 35 seconds left. The Cardinals would lose their first, and so far only, Super Bowl appearance. The team would lose in the divisional round the next year, and after Kurt Warner's retirement in 2010, the team wavered with losing seasons, and Whisenhunt was eventually let go. The Bruce Arians era began in 2013 and saw the team jump from 5-11 the previous year to 10-6. The Cardinals would lose in the wildcard round in 2014, and then, after a masterful 13-3 season with quarterback Carson Palmer and Bruce Arians at the helm, the team would reach the NFC Championship game again. However, they would lose that game to the insane 15-1 Carolina Panthers. And then after 2 middle-of-the-road seasons by Bruce Arians, Arians would retire in 2017. And after going 3-13 in one season under head coach Steve Wilkes in 2018, the team drafted quarterback Kyler Murray, number 1 overall, despite having taken quarterback Josh Rosen in the first round just the year prior. But I'd say it's paid off. Murray has combined forces with new head coach Cliff Kingsbury and have begun to start building a contender. Unfortunately, in 2019, owner Bill Bidwill passed away, and the ownership role was transferred to his son, Michael Bidwill, who will now oversee a new era of Cardinals football. After starting out strong in 2020, the team faltered down the stretch to an 8-8 record, but the Arizona Cardinals are off to an even stronger start in 2021, with a 6-0 start at the time of writing this, and look to be working towards something special. And there you have it. We have finally caught up to present day with the oldest continuous franchise in NFL history. Overall, the Cardinals have 572 wins, 771 losses, and 41 ties in their entire lifetime. That's a 41.3% winning percentage. Not great. And they own the record for not just the NFL, but including all 4 major professional sports leagues for the longest championship drought. To go along with that, the Cardinals have only won 6 playoff games in the last 60 years. But the Cardinals' most recent history has been some of their most exciting, and the current team is playing absolutely dominant football, with Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins at the helm. Can they finally break what some claim to be a curse placed on this team for that 1925 championship? Well, only time will tell. So, thank you all so much for watching. If you've made it this far, I'm extremely grateful, because this one's been a long one. But I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, then please hit like on this video, and please subscribe to join our growing community. Lastly, I ask you to share this video with anyone you might think would enjoy it, and leave a comment below of any future video requests. I would also like to hear your thoughts. Do you think the Cardinals have what it takes to finally win a Super Bowl? Let me know. And thank you all again so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.